before we get going, just a few things to make you aware of. I had mentioned last week about some of the newer items that we'd put up on the Bible Study Storehouse. The new DVD, The Divine Courtroom, republish of it, and repackaged, reversion of it this week. Excited to say this week it's now available on Amazon. If you go to Amazon and you do a search for The Divine Courtroom, Stephen Jones on Amazon, you will find this there now. So we're kind of really excited about that. There'll be some further promotion on it this week that we're going to be doing. So you can check that out there. Oh, and I should mention that if you've already purchased The Divine Courtroom, I would invite you to go check it out on Amazon and leave a review. Reviews are one of the best ways to increase its exposure and visibility on Amazon. So hop on there, write a bit of a, of course, positive review about it, and let people know how great that was. So, without any further ado, as it were. Whoops, there we are. So tonight's topic is about work, money, and taxes. And as I say, we may or may not get to all of it tonight, but we'll see how far we get. So, I just need to put out there, the information tonight is meant for educational and entertainment and maybe informative purposes only, and is no way meant to be regarded as advice. Just want to be really clear about that. This is not professional advice, it's not financial advice, investment advice, or anything like that. So, work. What is work? Well, you might be thinking, the work is that stuff that you may drudgingly go every, start out Monday with. It might be, if you're a student, it might be schoolwork. It might be whatever form of thing that you do on a regular basis. But what is work from a biblical perspective? Well, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the first version of work that we see show up. And what is the work that's going on? Well, what did God do in this? God created. And that is one of the fundamental aspects of work, is creation. So let's keep going on through here. What else? Psalms 24, 1-2. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded upon the seas and established it upon the floods. Again, this whole idea that God created, and in the very act of creating, in Psalms, we understand that the earth is the Lord. Why is the earth the Lord's? Earth is the Lord's because he created it. So, this whole idea that creation is a fundamental element of work. And some of us may be in work areas where we might be in a creative endeavor. We might be a person that is an interior designer, or an animator, or a video creator. Could be someone that's in carpentry. Even if any form of work is a process of creating. Even if someone were to dig a hole, they created the hole. And so then going back to this idea, Genesis 2, 1 and 2, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts with them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work, which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had made. Just going back again to this idea that the whole earth here was God's work. And so I just wanted to put a picture of the earth in there as part of that mix. The earth was God's work. And when you think about the earth, oftentimes you see a picture of it and you go, okay, well, that's the earth, I get it. We're very familiar now with that picture. But everything that resides on the earth, or has come off the earth. And when I mean that by all the creatures, all the created things, everything that man has created, except for the stuff that we launch off the earth, all resides there on earth. And going back to the root, ultimately, God created that. So this whole idea, creation is a fundamental element of work. Going a little bit further, Ephesians 2:10, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ unto good works, which God hath ordained that we should walk therein. This whole idea that even before even we were created, there was already set apart for us things that we were to do. That we are his workmanship. Not only is it the earth that he created, but we, in fact, of course, we know this, as we're going to see here, that, of course, we were created on the sixth day. We are part of the workmanship. Of course, that's in Genesis 1:26. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. We are a product of his creative work. Okay, so that's God's work. And we get that whole story of God's work there early on. So then what about our work? What are the origins of our work? Well, I'm touching base back in Genesis 1:26, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air. Effectively, our work was to have dominion over this space. And so a lovely little picture there of Adam and Eve, they're doing whatever they were. We get snapshots of what was going on, but we don't have a whole lot of detail there. So then, the story, as we know, going through Genesis, that whole Genesis story, the creation of man, the creation of Adam and Eve, and then we get to Genesis 3, and in that whole section there where they ate the apple, right? They chose to disobey. And so in verse 17, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast, of course, this is God speaking to Adam and Eve. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Moving on to 18, thorns also and thistles shall it bring. Oh, I'm sorry, to back up. I shouldn't have skipped there. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. Before that, we have an understanding that the ground didn't bring forth thorns, thistles, etc. It grew fruit, and it was all great. We understand after that there was going to need to be some work involved. If you're a gardener and you've done any sort of gardening, you know that you put the seeds in, you plant them and till them and all the rest of it, and then magically these weeds start appearing, and it takes work to nurture the plants and to, as much as the ground brings forth the bounty, still our work seems to be involved. So 19, in the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread till thou return to the ground, for out of it, thou was taken, and to dust thou will return. So this idea that you are now going to work from here on for what gets produced. This is effectively the origins of our work, where it would seem that we move from just simply hanging around the garden to becoming active participants in what that garden was going to bring forward. Okay, so the value of work. Some people then have thought, well, work, it's a lot of work. Why do I want to do so much work? So Ecclesiastes, there is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw that it was from the hand of God. So this is Solomon writing in Ecclesiastes. Earlier before this, he's talking about all the stuff that he'd made, all the his empire that he'd built there, talking about his being vanity, and he's kind of down and so forth. But he comes to this place in Ecclesiastes where he's suggesting that work is actually a really good thing. It gives purpose. It gives meaning. It gives the opportunity, actually, in a lot of ways, to step into what God did, and that is create. I know I appreciate that. I'm a bit of a creator. I love the idea of putting my hands to something, and when it's done, there's something to show for it. It might be an idea that I've had that I've wanted to bring forward, and once it's done, it's like, yeah, that's fantastic. That's what I brought forward. 2 Thessalonians, for even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. For we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all. This is Paul, of course, encouraging the people there that there's value in your efforts. And not only that, but, the old expression, there's no such thing as a free lunch. In 2 Thessalonians here, he's talking about that, how they showed up and were among them, and they, Paul and his associate, they didn't expect a free lunch either. They put forward effort and encouraging the rest in the community there that they should too. And then in Proverbs 10:4-5, he becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. Make, the old saying, make hay while the sun shines. When the sun is shining, that's the time to make hay. But this idea, when the harvest is ready to gather, be out there to gather it. Don't be slack at hand. Don't be lazy. That kind of idea. It's your effort that's going to move you forward. So Solomon is saying in Proverbs. So now, what else about work? Well, work is honorable. Colossians 3:22-24. Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. Now, this is from the KJV, so some of the language here, but basically, and when we're reading this, of course, not many of us are in a servanthood kind of relationship. Normally, it's an employer-employee kind of relationship. So, in all things that you do as an employer, even if you're self-employed, do it well. Do it even as if you were doing it for God. Be in singleness of heart, fearing God. And whatsoever you do, do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that the Lord ye shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. So, of course, this is Paul encouraging them, whatever you're doing it, do it well. Do it as if you were making it for God, regardless of who the employer is, regardless of the attitude of the one that you happen to be under. Work is an honorable thing to do. And it reminds me too that as people look at us as individuals and consider our value, we all have value simply because we are people, but oftentimes we are judged, especially by those that are of the world, for what we do, what we produce. And part of our influence, part of who we show up to be, if we want to be seen by or heard by others, what we do and how we show up really affects how people judge us. They would consider us to be honorable. It's not all about how people evaluate us, but if we're looking to be a demonstration of Christ in our life, that is part of how we can do that. So we've talked about work. We've looked at what work is. Now to bring this idea of theft. The idea that theft is the opposite of work. Now, that might strike you a little odd in the beginning, but if you think about it, why do people steal? What's the point of stealing? Why would a person not just gain employment or do what's necessary to have the money to buy what they took? And so if you think of it from that point of view, theft is the opposite of work. It's almost a sense of rebellion saying, I don't want to have anything to do with putting the effort into it. I just want whatever it is. You go into the local store, I want a candy bar, and I just want to take it. I don't want to pay for it. I want to keep the money in my pocket. Could be any of those kinds of idea. But it comes back to this idea that theft is taking property that belongs to another or using it without the consent of the rightful owner. Theft is the opposite of labor, and thus in Scripture, labor is the antidote to theft. This is written by Stephen Jones in his book, God's Law and Restitution. So, this idea then of theft, what does then, if work is the antidote to theft, as Stephen is suggesting, let's take a little bit of a look at that. So these are some of the laws that talk about how theft in the Bible is handled. And in Exodus 22, 1-3, it says, if a man steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. And then in verse 3, for he should make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he should be sold for his theft. So this is effectively biblical law about how to handle theft. And it describes here then 2 different types of animals that got stolen, uses as examples here, ox and sheep. And it basically is the idea of making restitution. So if someone, for example, were to steal a sheep from a neighbor, then the law here is saying that, well, then you need to restore to the man that you stole from 4 sheep. If you stole an oxen, which by the way, in that time would have been the equivalent of a tractor, because you would have, for tilling, that kind of thing, sheep are animals that you're going to raise up and eat, but the oxen are actually tools. You'd hook a plow to the oxen, this kind of thing. So the oxen were actually even more valuable. So if you steal the ox from someone, then you owe 5 of those back. So then in 3, for he should make full restitution. So the idea being then, let's say, just to put some numbers on this, some value, if the sheep were worth $100 and you stole the sheep, then you owe the value of, or either 4 sheep back, or the value of those 4 sheep back, that would be $400. If he have nothing, then he should be sold for his theft. Sold, what's that about? Now it's kind of interesting, and this is a whole other study in itself about biblical law and how it handles this kind of thing. But it's interesting that in the law here, nowhere does it say that you should take that man and put him in a box for 2 years or 10 years, or that you should put him in a prison for any period of time. That's not the prescription on how to do it. Of course, without going down this rabbit trail about the justice system too far, as we all know, when that happens nowadays and a man gets caught for theft or whatever it is and he gets put in prison, he actually doesn't have any means at that point to make restitution or to pay back or anything. In fact, it costs everybody to keep him in there for the amount of time. What this is prescribing is that that man would be sold for his theft. Being sold for his theft in that time would mean that basically someone would come along, because of course it's suggesting here that the man has no means to pay it. So if he owed, again, the sheep that are worth $100 each, he owes $400. How's he going to owe the $400? It's like, well, he stole because he didn't have any money to begin with. So what's he going to do? Well, somebody else comes along and says, you know what? The man looks like he can work. I'll hire him. And so somebody comes along and hires that man. And that man that committed the theft, he goes and works for the guy that just effectively hired him. But instead of being hired and paid his wage, effectively that money goes back to the guy that he stole it from. That was how this system would work. And that's what that means, being sold for his theft. It's almost like he was sold for the value of the thing that he stole. And of course, once his debt's paid off, in this case, let's say it was the $400 that he owed to his neighbor because he stole the 1 sheep, then as soon as the debt's paid off, the $400 is paid back, then he's free to go. The debt's been paid. That's how biblical law handles theft. But it's this whole idea that the theft itself is taken care of through the man's work. That's why work is the antidote to theft. Any thoughts on that principle? It's kind of a novel idea. Instead of locking the guy up for however long a period. All right, so a question, a thought. Who owns the worker's work? Now that might be a question that you might not have thought too much about. Whoever the worker is, let's say I'm the worker, or you're the worker, or any of us in the room here, who owns our work? Well, you're right. The idea that if you are an employee, if you're an employee of someone, and you've been doing that work for, the comment was that if you're working for someone, then they own the work that you create. Right. And in that process, then of them owning the work, what was the process in which you got to let them own the work? You came to some kind of agreement on that? Is that fair to say?
Yep.
Excuse me. So effectively, in the employment contract, if you like, in the employment contract, you agreed that as part and parcel of you working for them, that you gave them the rights to your work because they're paying you for it. Is that fair to say? Mm-hmm. But even at that point, you then still had the right to make the agreement to sell your work.
True.
Is that fair to say? So ultimately, who owns your work?
We do.
Ultimately, it seems the idea that we own our work. So I want to put that out there as a premise, and something that might seem, on one hand, it might seem like duh. On the other hand, it's an important note, and it's going to come up, because we're probably not going to get that far today, probably come up next time, that this notion that we own our work and we have the rights to our work is an important point. So I just want to leave it at that, but something that you can think a little bit more about. Okay, so moving on from this idea of work, let's talk a bit about taxes. What are taxes? Anybody have an idea of what taxes are?
Government-enforced payments.
Government-enforced payments. Any other idea? Any other idea?
Taxes are money that everyone gives so that the community can be improved.
Taxes are money that everyone gives so that the community can be improved.
It's for everyone.
It's for everyone. So there's some common good in the idea of taxes. It's for the common good. Okay? All right.
That Mr. Bob says tithes, taxes are tithes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bob. The idea of tithes can be an idea of taxes. This idea of going back to the common good, are those typically voluntary? You know, we have some friends, they live on they actually have a cottage in a location, and they live on a private road. And they actually deal with some of this because the road needs upkeep, and there are about 15 families that use the road. The road needs upkeep, and they've effectively agreed to keep it up. And that all works great as long as everybody agrees. And but the principle here that if to use the analogy that was made about taxes paying for roads and stuff like that, you know, if everybody just agreed to do it, then there wouldn't need to be any kind of level of enforcement. You know, of course, that's that flip side between you know, hearing God's voice, and if everybody were in tune and everyone came at from a perspective of loving one another and giving and all that kind of stuff, this would be a no-brainer. It wouldn't need any enforcement, right?
Agreed.
Yay. That doesn't seem to be the reality that we're currently working in. And so this idea then that at least in our experience, taxes tend to be something that aren't voluntary but tend to be government enforced, or that there's an enforcement regime in place surrounding taxes. Okay, so those are some ideas around taxes. So what I wanted to look at was how, because there's some people that look at taxes and have feelings about that kind of in one direction or another, and I thought it'd be interesting to look into kind of how taxes were handled in Israel biblically. So it talks here about in Deuteronomy 18, 1-3, the priests, the Levites, and the tribe of Levi shall have no part nor inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings of the Lord made by fire and his inheritance. Therefore, shall thou have no inheritance among their brethren. The Lord is their inheritance, and he hath said unto them. Now, just before we go further, the idea there here, just to put a little bit of meat on this, all the different tribes had an actual amount of land. When the Israelites moved into and conquered Canaan and set up the kingdom, each tribe was given a different space in the land of Israel. But the tribe of Levi was not. The tribe of Levi was scattered all over Israel. And they were there to serve as priests and to serve the people. And in a lot of ways, they actually fulfilled the role of a civil servant. They not only kept as I understand it, they acted as the scribes. They acted as just the local information, those pieces of any nation that need to be taken care of on a national basis. They serve somewhat of that role. Verse 3, and this shall be the priest's due from the people, from them that offer the sacrifice, whether it be ox or sheep, and they shall give it unto the priest the shoulder, and the 2 cheeks, and the maw. So out of the offering, there was a portion of the offering that actually went to the priest. This was part of what sustained that the local priest and the priesthood in general came from the offerings. And you can think of this in some ways as part of a tax. Then in Numbers 18, 8-32, talks about the offerings and the portions of the Levite, and you can look that up yourself. And then in Exodus 30, 11-16, this is where it talks about the census tax. And it talks about the idea that when a census was to be taken, each man was to bring half a shilling. And it's another form of a tax that was in the nation of Israel, and was part of those systems that did support the nation overall. And it shows an example that for any nation to function, for any community to come together and function, there has to be resources that are held in common. And there needs to be resources put together, financial resources put together to handle that. It could be roads. It could be any manner of course, in the modern world, it's plumbing, it's sewage, it's so many different aspects. Even right down to defense. Of course, the Israelites, they maintained an army, the weaponry had to be acquired, etc. So these are some examples of some internal taxes in Israel. Now, if these are some of the internal ones, what about external taxes? Now, we might not often think of external taxes in that kind of terminology, but in the Old Testament, the word for taxes often comes up as the idea of tribute. And we see some examples in Joshua 16:10 and through here. So, of course, in the time of Joshua, the Israelites have come in. They've conquered the land of Canaan. Shortly after, Moses has died. The nation is very new. It says, and they drove not out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwelt among them, and Ephraim's unto this day, and serve under tribute. This idea of tribute, then, is this idea that they didn't drive all the Canaanites out. They let some of them stay. And the ones that stayed, the Israelites, basically had them pay taxes, is another way of looking at that terminology. And they served under tribute. 2 Chronicles 18:10 is another example. Then King Rehoboam, now this is, of course, much later. This is after the time of Solomon. The kingdom has been divided. Then King Rehoboam sent Hadram that was over the tribute, and the children of Israel stoned him with stones that he died. But King Rehoboam made speed to get right, and he fled to Jerusalem. The point here being that this fella, Hadram, he was the guy that took care of the tribute or the taxes. He was the one that went out and was effectively the chief tax collector, you might think of. So tribute, this idea of tribute. So to look into that word a little bit. Tribute is the word. Now, if you're familiar with Strong's Concordance is a book whereby it indexes words from the King James Version, and shows you what the original Hebrew or Greek word was, and then gives you a definition of that. So the original word was mak or mass. I believe it was pronounced mass. Strong's number is 04522. And this is the definition of tribute, or this word in Hebrew, mak, that has been translated into tribute. So the definition of a gang or body of forced laborers, you can see it here, serfdom, tributary, gang overseers, C, forced service, servitude, tribute, or enforced payment. So this idea of tribute and taxes can be one and the same, as we see here. There are a lot of other examples of where this showed up as well. There's this happened a lot in the time of King Nebuchadnezzar, when King Nebuchadnezzar conquered the kingdom of Judah. And for a time there, Nebuchadnezzar was charging tribute. In fact, there's the story earlier on where the king of Judah at one point was paying tribute to the Egyptians, and he was paying it to them to keep them happy. And then Nebuchadnezzar beat the Egyptians, and so the king changed his loyalty and started paying tribute to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, let's not quite go there yet. This idea being that oftentimes tribute was a way to appease a conquering or a potentially conquering enemy. In fact, if you read through that story, and I believe it's Jehoiakim, where he changed his allegiance from Egypt to Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, talks about how he did that for about 3 years. And then at the end of 3 years, he stopped paying tribute, and that set up the reason that Nebuchadnezzar actually came in to start the conquering of Jerusalem. All right. Jesus' view on taxes. What did he have to say about it? Good place to go to. Some of the stuff you're probably fairly familiar with. Matthew 22, 17 to 21. Tell us, therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Just to set this up, of course, we're now in the time of the Romans, and there are those that are trying to trick Jesus into saying words that would be anti-Roman. And so he's being set up here in verse 18. But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt ye, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. Notice it calls it the tribute money. If you look that up in other translations, it often refers to that as I believe it translates that as the tax money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he saith unto them, Who is this image and superscription? And they saith unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. There's a whole lot of stuff in there, even too, about the whole idea about how Caesar would have created that money. It had his picture on it. He owned the money, so give unto Caesar. If that's his money in the sense that he issued it, then, and if he's demanding it, then pay it unto him. That term tribute there, of course, we're now in Greek. That's Strong's number 2778. The definition here, number 2, the coin with which tax is paid. Tribute money. Again, it brings this connection with taxes and tribute. To the point, Jesus is saying, don't rebel against the idea of paying taxes. Paul's view on taxes. Romans 13, 6-7. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom their tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to fear, etc. Whoever is something to do is due, pay it to them. But in verse 6 it has this idea here, for they are God's ministers. This idea that wherever we live, whatever country we live in, the system that's been put in place, they are the ministers of God's government, as it is currently in this space. They've been set up, they're anointed for the time to be the administrators of that area. So being as such, pay them their due. And that's about as far as I wanted to get to today in this topic of money, taxes, and income. We'll come back with the second part of this about income next week, next Sunday at about 7 o'clock. We will look forward to you joining us then, and we'll pick up this conversation next Sunday. Thanks so much and have a great week.